So what are your goals this year? Let's take one goal, your most important goal, and significantly increase it, and significantly reduce the time frame to achieve it. What if I asked you to triple the size of your goal and achieve it in 1/3 of the amount of time? What would you say? You'd probably say, impossible. Well, let me ask you a disruptive question, and this is one that you want to write down. It's impossible unless, and then finish that sentence. It's impossible unless what? What would have to happen to achieve that supersized goal in a compressed time frame? I remember Walter Isaacson relating 2 stories about Steve Jobs. The first one was the young Steve when he was at Atari. Steve was newly back from his India trek where he wandered penniless for months and was now back in the States living in a Buddhist commune located on an apple farm. He comes into Atari barefoot, wearing his Indian robes. Steve had become a vegan and what is called a fruitarian. He believed his diet restricted his body odor from producing any smell. So he concludes that he doesn't have to shower as often or wear deodorant. Well, his co-workers did not come to the same conclusion based on the radical revolt of their nose. So they relegated Steve to the night shift so they didn't have to work with him or smell him. Working alone, he invites his buddy Steve Wozniak to come into Atari at night so that he could play the games while Steve worked. Steve then gets assigned this big project to take the game Pong, if you remember that, and turn it into a single-player game. Instead of 2 players paddling the dot back and forth, this game is 1 player and the dot bounces off the paddle and breaks bricks on the wall until the player breaks out. The game is called Breakout. Steve knows that his buddy Woz is a brilliant engineer, and he says to Woz, "You need to build this game, and you need to build it in 4 days." Woz says, "That's impossible. That would take a month, maybe a month and a half at best." Steve says to Woz, "Look at me." Steve had developed this unnerving, unblinking stare. He says to Woz, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." Wozniak is the one who coined this as Steve's reality distortion field. But the weird thing about the reality distortion field, said Wozniak, is that it works. Woz did it. He built the entire game that became a very successful game in 4 days. Woz said, he makes you believe something you once thought was impossible, that it is possible. And you just go to work on figuring out how to make it possible. Wendell Weeks, the chairman, CEO, and president of Corning Glass, testified to the same. When Steve was building the iPhone, he was looking for thin glass that was strong enough to be on the face of a phone, but sensitive enough to be used for touch controls. He had searched all over China, where all the other parts of the phone were being built, but to no avail. A board member called Steve and said that he should visit Corning Glass in New York. Steve is sitting in Wendell's office, and he says, "Here's what we need." Wendell recounts how they once did a certain type of process that made a type of glass that was thin but really strong. They were going to call it Gorilla Glass. Steve said, "Wonderful. The iPhone is coming out in October of this year, and I need this much glass," and gives them a big order. Wendell responds, "Well, you don't understand. We've never done it before. We've never manufactured this. It would take us years to perfect this process and build manufacturing facilities for it. We just can't do it. I'm sorry." And Steve said the same thing he said to Woz back at Atari 35 years earlier. He said, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." Wendell thought, this guy is nuts. But he picks up the phone and calls his plant in Lexington, Kentucky, who was making the glass for flat screens. He says to the plant manager, "I want you to convert to making this new process starting tomorrow." The plant manager said, "That's impossible." And Wendell responded, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." Of course, they did, and that is why every piece of glass on the iPhone and iPad is made by Corning Glass, when all the other parts of those devices are sourced and assembled in China. Here's what I want you to do this morning. Take a look at your list of goals this year. What is the most important? The one that would have the most impact on your life? your business, your future, and the future of those that you are responsible for. Identify what would be 3 times that goal and what would be 1/3 of the time to achieve it. And before your brain revolts, just look at me. Don't be afraid. You can do it. Come back tomorrow and I will help you finish the end of this sentence. It's impossible unless. What follows after unless is the plan to achieving what you once thought was impossible. So jot your 3x goal and your new deadline in your Darren Daily journal. And then inspire the community. What were you once told was impossible? Or when did you think something was impossible that you then made possible because you decided to believe it? Help embolden the belief system of your fellow Darren Daily members. And then come back tomorrow so I can give you a framework for building your plan.